Hi everyone, it's Nina, and I'm here today to share with you a card that I have featuring some Altenew products, including the Doodle Bloom stamp set and the Lyrical Script stamp set. I'm going to be doing some no-line Copic coloring in this card, and I'm going to show you how I've created it. Starting off with, I'm making my base for my Copic coloring. I'm going to be using some Nina Solar White cardstock here that I'm die cutting the Simon Says Stamp Stitched Rectangles die from. This is the largest of the stitch dies. I'm just going to run this through my Big Shot. Once I've got that cut out, I'm going to take this die from Pretty Pink Posh. This is one of the Stitched Borders dies, and it has this beautiful little flourish along the edge, which I think it's going to make a nice little addition to my card, help fancy it up for Christmas. I'm using my Misty stamping tool, and I'm going to be stamping this Lyrical Script stamp onto the panel here. I'm going to prep it with my powder tool just to get off all the static and make sure that the embossing powder sticks only to the ink. I'll go ahead and press that down. Once I've got it gold heat embossed using some Princess Gold embossing powder, I'm going to take the Doodle Bloom stamp set and some Pumice Stone Distress ink, and we're going to do some stamping. I'm going to do some second generation of all of these images using this Pumice Stone ink. It makes a nice base coat for all of the different images that I'm using, and once we have everything colored, you won't see the lines from this ink, and that works really well. It doesn't bleed either, which is a nice thing. So I'll just go ahead and keep adding in different images from the stamp set. These are some leaves, and now I'm adding in some smaller flowers just to fill in the spaces. I started off with my largest images first, and then I'm going ahead and adding in my smaller images to fill in the spaces. So now I'm starting off with my Copic coloring, and right now I'm putting down the areas with my lightest color of where I'm going to want my shadows to be. And this is going to help me in making sure that I don't get too dark with my coloring. So basically right now, this coloring that I'm doing right now is just a guide for what I will be doing later on. So I'll just keep adding in my lightest color, and I've got all the colors that I'm using listed on the side of the screen. That way you can reference these color combinations if you like them. I'm using a very light hand when I'm feathering in the color on these bigger flowers. Make sure that way I don't get too heavy of a color all at once. For the smaller flowers, I'm just solidly coloring in these because they're so small you won't be able to do a lot of shading on them. So now I'm starting off with my darkest color, and I'm adding in where the deepest shadows would be, bringing that in. And I did end up deciding as I went along to go a bit darker on these flowers. So this will end up being my mid-tone, but currently as I'm coloring this, it was going to be my darkest color. So I'll just keep adding in that color in all the different nooks and crannies, making sure I stay only where the darkest coloring will be. So here you see I switched to a darker color and really deepening up those shadows now, and I really liked this a lot better. You can see I'm really covering up the areas that we already placed down. Again, those were just our little guides in where we were going to be putting the shading, and now we're filling it in with the lighter color once more. You can see this really creates a nice realistic flower with a lot of dimension, and we're going to keep going and really intensify that shading to make it come to life. This adds a lot of contrast to your coloring, and this is what helps bring your coloring to life. I get a lot of questions asking how I bring such color and depth into my cards, and it's just from adding in and embracing all of that shading and making sure I take in those dark colors and place them down so that way we can get a nice contrast from the lights to the darks. So now I'm working on my leaves, and I'm taking two different types of greens for these leaves. I'm starting off with my lighter green, and I'm going to be coloring in all of these leaves. And then as you can see, I'm skipping over some of the other leaves. Those are going to be done in darker greens, and that'll help give a nice difference in color and add a little bit more interest to the leaves. So I'm taking my mid-tone and adding in some shading. And then I'll go ahead and go back over that with my darkest color on just the very edges to bring in some deeper contrast and adds a bit more layers to the card. So now I'm working on the stems of these leaves, and I'm using some light browns to go over the stems, and then I'll bring in a darker brown and just add some subtle shading to the very edges of the stems. They're very small, so you don't want to go too heavy. It'll get too fat for the lines, and they won't look as thin and delicate as they do in the stamp. So now I'm coming back over to my flowers once more, and I'm deepening up those shadows again. Just making sure I get in as much contrast as I can. You don't want to go all at once with especially images this big with so much saturation. The reds especially are a color that will bleed very easily. So I've let those dry while I was coloring the rest of my images, and now I'm going back in to add in the darker color. And this helps really deepen up those flowers and bring them to life, and I love the result. Now that I've finished my Copic coloring, I'm going to be taking this piece of craft from here and I'm going to attach it to the back side of this panel. It's going to raise it up off the card. And I'm going to apply some adhesive along the bottom so I can attach this little strip of pattern paper. And I'm going to go ahead and just lay that down, line it up with the paper. So now that I've finished all that, I've attached my panel onto this gold foil card base that I've created, and I'm tying a white bow around the center. I'm going to take some gold bow wire and tie that into the middle of my little bow here. I love bow wire because it has a nice wire inside that helps give a nice support to the bow and not let it flop around. To finish off, I've added some pretty pink posh sequins and some Wink of Stella glitter. So I hope you've enjoyed. Be sure to stop over at my blog where you can get more still pictures and inspiration, as well as products used. And thanks so much for stopping by. Be sure to give this video a thumbs up, and we'll see you again soon.